In this video, I'm going to talk about fiscal policy and its measurement. First, I'll explain about what is fiscal policy. Now, let's explain about fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the revenue and expenditure policy of the government, focusing on growth and stability of the economy. According to this hero, fiscal policy is defined as the discretionary action by the government to change the level of government expenditure on goods and services and transfer payments and the yield of taxation at any given level of output. In the words of Musgrave, fiscal policy is concerned with those aspects of economic policy which arise in the operations of the public budget. Types of fiscal policy and instrument of fiscal policy will be explained further in this video. There are four types of fiscal policy: anti-inflationary fiscal policy, anti-deflationary fiscal policy, growth-oriented fiscal policy, and equity-oriented fiscal policy. Instruments of fiscal policy are of four components: government expenditure, taxes, public debt or public borrowing, and deficit financing. Objectives of fiscal policy: full employment, price stability, reduction in economic inequality, economic growth. Now, let's explain in details types of fiscal policy. Anti-inflationary fiscal policy. Anti-inflationary fiscal policy involves adjustment in government expenditures, taxation and borrowing and debt management policies. Borrowing and debt management policies are related to the central bank's monetary policy and is treated as a third type of stabilization policy, distinct from either monetary policy or fiscal policy. Anti-deflationary fiscal policy. In case of falling prices or deflation, fiscal policy seeks to increase aggregate demand by increasing public expenditure and lowering the rates of taxation. These measures tend to increase the flow of liquidity in the economy. Growth-oriented fiscal policy. In a welfare state like India, there is a direct intervention by the government in the production process. The government spearheads the process of growth through investment expenditure in strategic sectors of the economy. Autonomous investment by the government is a key instrument of fiscal policy in India. It seeks to trigger the pace of growth. Equity-oriented fiscal policy. In democratic countries, economic inequalities are sought to be removed through appropriate fiscal measures. To achieve this objective, progressive direct taxes like income tax, wealth tax, debt duty are levied. The incidence of these taxes is more on the rich. The tax proceeds are spent on welfare schemes for weaker sections of the society. Accordingly, The gap between the rich and the poor is sought to be reduced. Instruments of fiscal policy: government expenditure, taxes, public debt, deficit financing. Government expenditure. Expenditure incurred by the government is referred to as public expenditure. It is the principal instrument of fiscal policy. The government of a country incurs various types of expenditure. Expenditure on public works programs such as the construction of roads, dams, bridges. Expenditure on education and public welfare programs. Expenditure on the defense of the country and the maintenance of law and order. Expenditure on various types of subsidies to the producers with a view to encouraging production. Taxes. Taxes are a compulsory payment made to government by the household and the producing sectors. Taxes are of two types. Direct taxes. Direct taxes are those taxes which are levied on income and property of the person. The burden of these taxes are borne by those persons on whom these are levied. Income tax, gift tax, wealth tax are some examples of direct taxes. Direct taxes. Direct taxes are those taxes which are levied on goods and services. The burden of these taxes may be transferred to other persons. Sales tax, excise duty, custom duty are examples of indirect taxes. By increasing the tax burden on the households and the producers, the government reduces purchasing power in the economy. On the other hand, by lowering tax burden, the government increases the purchasing power. Thus, when flow of credit is to be increased, tax burden on the households and the producer is to reduce. Likewise, when flow of credit is to be decreased, tax burden on the households and the producer is increased. Public borrowing. Public borrowing refers to borrowing by the government for purpose of investment or consumption expenditure. It impacts aggregate demand and consequently the situations of inflation and deflation in the economy. When a debt needs to be increased, the government reduces its borrowing from the public so that people are left with greater liquidity and aggregate expenditure is boosted. On the other hand, when a debt needs to be reduced, the government steps up borrowing by offering attractive rate of interest. This reduces the flow of liquidity in the economy. Accordingly, aggregate expenditure is reduced. Deficit financing. When the government meets its budgetary deficit by borrowing from the central bank, it is often called deficit financing. Deficit financing increases the flow of money in the economy. It triggers aggregate demand. It is used as an instrument of fiscal policy when there is an economic slowdown. However, when there is an inflationary pressure in the economy, deficit financing is discouraged with a view to containing aggregate expenditure or aggregate demand. It may be noted that excessive access to deficit financing often lowers credit rating of the government and points to the lack of fiscal discipline in the economy. Such a situation often impedes the flow of investment and leads to situations of economic stagnation.